So welcome to Forgotten Greens session, talk, workshop, whatever you wish to call it. Today's theme is Decolonizing Food Systems by Reclaiming Wild Plants. This is the work that I've been doing for a while and something very close to my heart. And I'm really excited to be sharing this today evening. So, yes, I will start by sharing about myself, a quick introduction about myself. I like to say that my journey of unlearning began around 2011 when I started working with Adivasi and other rural communities in rural Andhra and Telangana. And that was the time, this was soon after my post-graduation, and that was the time a lot of my unlearning began, a lot of unlearning of my theories, philosophies, the rational mind, everything started everything started dismantling itself, and because of the experiences I had working with these communities. And one of the things that happened to me was I started finding answers to a lot of questions that I was seeking, and at the same time a lot of questions to a lot of figured out answers I had, that those started happening, like is this really what it is, like is this really what I think it is development, like the idea of development that I had grown up with, is that really development? And all these questions started happening for me, and since then my journey of unlearning started. In around 2014 I co-founded a non-profit organization in rural Andhra where the focus of our work was to decolonize and contextualize learning spaces. And we did this basically with schools, government-run schools for children, Adivasi children, and we would host sessions around unlearning and cooperative learning. And after that, I spent a year or so with an alternative university called Swaraj University in Udaipur, where I wanted to experience how does running an alternative and inclusive learning space for youth really work? Is it even possible? What are the challenges? What are the learnings? What entails behind, like when I saw Swaraj University, it looked really awesome, but what was the real picture behind it? And I wanted to experience that, so I worked with Swaraj University for some time. And throughout this time, so my knowledge around wild edible plants started, I think, when I was working with Adivasi communities, and as I was journeying in my own, like my journey of unlearning was unfolding, my knowledge around wild edibles was deepening. I experimented with wild food cafes, wild food walks, and it was just a lot of learning that happened. I am also a facilitator. I facilitate spaces for personal, interpersonal, and systemic changes for individuals, specifically for youth. I host programs like Moonstool mapping, conversations around body positivity, and also a lot of work around supporting youth who are working towards social change. Forgotten Greens as an initiative started in 2018. It was a social media page that I just started because I wanted to share this overflowing love I had for wild edible plants. And then it just took a shape of its own. And currently I am co-running a space called Unlearning Ashram with my partner in Kozhikode, Kerala, where we are just focusing on how to create spaces of unlearning, of questioning, of really re-looking at preconceived notions, preconceived philosophies for youth. And this is like in a nutshell about me. Before we get into the topic, I want to take a moment and really take a moment to remember all those people who were my gurus and who were my teachers, mentors, because of whom I'm sitting here giving this talk, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. And these are, some of them are individuals I lived with, I worked with. Some of them were just random strangers. For example, this man who was just by selling greens, and I had a conversation, and many such random strangers with whom I had conversations around greens and how to eat this, what to eat this, why not to eat this. Just taking a moment and inviting you also to take a moment to just remember all those people who have contributed in your journey in whatever ways they have. Yeah. Okay. So Forgotten Greens, like I shared, it was an initiative that I started as a social media on Facebook. I just started it as a page to share my overflowing love for the knowledge of wild edible plants. Also, I realized that as I'm not a herbalist, I'm not a botanist. I have no background of plants. And when I wanted to learn more about it, I found that there were not many reliable sources there, except for elders in my community or elders in other communities. And one of the ways that I felt I can contribute to this work was by creating a space of reliable source where I can share about my own personal experiences, how I use it, how I do not use it. So that's how it started. And then slowly, I realized that this work is really important because it's about reviving and reclaiming the disappearing knowledge system. So there is a lot of knowledge around wild edible plants. However, it's disappearing, or it's there in the collective consciousness, but like a collective memory. However, the plants are becoming rare. People don't know which plant is. So everybody knows philanthus is this plant, but they don't know when they really go and access the plant, they don't know if this is the one or that is the one. So that there's a huge mismatch that is happening. So I realized that this work is really important in reclaiming this knowledge system, and at the same time contextualizing the knowledge system. There is a knowledge that has come through my ancestor, through our ancestors, however, I am not living in my glorious past. Like a lot of times, in this kind of work, what happens is there's a lot of romanticization of the glorious past without really understanding without really connecting it to this is the reality right now. I'm in the 21st century where the food habits, food choices have changed drastically than what my grandmom used to eat. So how do I contextualize this knowledge, like making sure that the essence and the crux of that is still alive, but at the same time adapt it to 2020, adapted to this time frame that we are living in. And lastly, very important and very close to, like, I feel this is very important work. I felt like as I started, as Forgotten Greens became deeper and deeper, I realized it is one of the ways to reconnect to the land. And whatever land means to you, whatever land means to me, land for me is just a dozen pots that's growing in my terrace right now. That's land for me because I get to connect to earth and, play with the soil. So connect to the land. That can also be the footpath right outside my building. And also another aspect of it is to reclaim autonomy over health. Health, and we'll talk more about this later. Health, this was part, like the wild edible plants was an integral part of our medicinal system, the natural medicine system, the herbal medicinal system, which has completely, it's been disrupted big time, commercialized. So how do we go back to that and build that autonomy? And the last one, unlayering the sheets of food colonization. And when I say food colonization, I don't mean the British colonization of food. That's not what I mean. That's the mainstream understanding of colonization. When I say colonization, it's basically the colonization that has happened by the market systems. The colonization, for example, I live in Kerala right now, and I see there's a lot of colonization of the northern mainstream food that has happened. Sorry, the colonization of southern food has happened, where we eat a lot of North Indian food. So colonization in that sense, colonization across, colonization in the um, in the caste-based colonization that has happened. So there are like layers of colonization that has happened, and India being a very diverse and complex society, colonization is not like one. If I take this out, colonization, we can't see the colonization. It's just a lot of layers, and that's what the work of Forgotten Greens is also, is what I believe strongly. So when I say forgotten greens, I mean wild edible plants, the uncultivated plants. So where do we find them? These One of the myths that I have often heard people is, but forgotten green, like wild edible plants are accessible only in rural areas. It's something that grows in villages, which is it's a myth. It's not true. You can find wild plants growing in the 13th floor of a concrete building. If you have some, like a small pot with some mud in it, there will be wild plants that will pop up someday. If you keep watering it without any seeds, without the intention of cultivating something in it, wild plants will come. But that's because that's the nature of soil, and that's the ecosystem that's alive there. So where do we find these forgotten trees? They're everywhere. If you start noticing, they're everywhere. They are in your terrace gardens, pots, garden spaces, in the concrete cracks. I love looking at how, in the buildings, if there are cracks, there'll be a plant will be coming out of it. And those are also, most of them would be edible. May not be healthy, but they would be edible. You will find these in between interlocking tiles. If you have a concrete compound which is not maintained strictly, you will find these things popping up in between those gaps between the tiles. These grow in empty plots, small piece of land that is left unnoticed. Anywhere in urban space, if you have an empty plot, you will find this growing. These growing footpaths, road dividers. I've seen the most healthiest growing plants in road dividers. They might be polluted, so there you might have to like spend time to make sure that they're cleaned properly and everything. But yeah, they give you the best wild edible plants. And wherever there is earth that is untouched and is left for wilderness to thrive, anywhere, any patch of land that is left untouched, there will be at least one plant that will grow there. It will pop up. And yeah, so this is all where, so whenever I talk about foraging and forgotten greens, I hear a lot of people they often ask me, but you live in Kerala is more greener place, urban spaces are not green. These are misconceptions. The plants grow everywhere where there's earth and where there's possibility. So yes, some of the forgotten greens that I think you might be able to identify. The first one is wood sorrel. It's called. I'm just sharing the Sanskrit name and not the other regional language names. So it's called changeri in Sanskrit, and this is you. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's a very commonly growing plant, and it has this very sour, tangy taste. You can eat it raw, and it's very easy to propagate. Also, you can collect seeds if you want. So I have one growing in one of my pots, and I collected it. Was one day I was just waiting outside a restaurant waiting for food, and I saw this near like the steps, and I just picked some of it, and I came and I dropped it in the pot, and they're there. You can add it to your salads. You can add it to anything, dal. You can add it to your omelets, if you like a little bit of tanginess in your omelet. So that's wood sorrel. The next one is purslane. Purslane is also very commonly growing. Most of um, urban India will have this. Except I'm not sure about northeastern India because I've not explored the flora of that region. However, the rest of the urban India will surely have purslane. Purslane is this very it's a succulent, glossy leaf, and it is known to be cooling. It cools the body. And I remember eating it for the first time when I had done a farm visit in the hot Telangana. It was really hot. And my colleague, uh, she collected these and she made dal with this. And I remember like late after eating the dal, there was like significant change that I could really feel in my body. So that's purslane. The next one is asthma weed, common spurge. Uh, I grew up seeing this plant growing everywhere, and I used to think this is poisonous because when you break the stem or the leaf, there's a milky sap that oozes out of it. And I used to think that this is poisonous because whatever has milky sap coming out of it has to be poisonous. Only a few years before, back, I realized that I learned that it is known to cure asthma, um, but you have to eat it, consume it in a proper format. So you can't just randomly have it and expect it to be curing asthma. However, you can make delicious tea from it. It has a very earthy flavor. Have it in very small quantities, maybe once in 10 days. Really good for the body. The next one is, and yes, the asthma weed also has this very interesting, the milky sap can be used, you can apply it on warts on the body and the warts fall off. You have to apply it over a period of 21 days or more and the warts fall off. So that's asthma weed. The next one is Bengal dayflower. Now this one pops up um, soon after the first rain. Monsoons happen and these will just pop up everywhere. Roadsides, you will find Bengal dayflower growing in the roadsides for sure. And these are very pretty blue colored flower. Bengal dayflower, as I started exploring this more and learning about it, I realized the leaves used to be uh, used to make fritters, bhajiyas, traditionally. Before the alus, before the potatoes and other stuff came into picture, Bengal dayflower fritters or bhajiyas were what used to, yeah, is what traditionally they used to use. And the leaf has a very interesting, it pops up when you put it in with the batter. If you put it in the hot oil, the leaf has this, like, the leaf doesn't pop up, but the fritter pops up. It's a fun thing to eat during monsoons. The next one is common lucas. Locally, it's called tumbapu, in Malayalam. And this grows common. I've seen these grow in the urban concrete landscape of Chennai. Mm, the flowers are known, the entire plant has high medicinal property. The leaves can are used to heal, cure insect bites. I'm not sure about scorpion and snake bites, but I'm sure that it really helps in curing insect bites. The flowers can be used to heal sinus. So you prepare a particular oil using the flowers, and then you apply it whenever you have sinus attack. And I love adding the leaves um, to, to pasta, to noodles, to omelets. It has a very peculiar flavor, a very strong flavor, which is really interesting when you add it to your diet. You can even make a pesto. I've been wanting to make tumba pesto for a while, but it doesn't grow as abundantly where I live. Hopefully one day I will. The next one is crown flower. I am like 99% sure you may have seen this plant growing somewhere in India at some point. I remember this plant from childhood because the topmost part of the flower is it looks like a crown, and we used to take it as kids and put it on our forehead or nose, and pretend as if it's a bindi or nose pin. But so the plant is not edible as as the other plants are. You can't add it to your diet, but it's highly medicinal. And I got to know about its medicinal property a few years back when my mother had a lot of leg pain. She had a lot of ankle pain, and so somebody from her circle told her about the plant and how you can use a certain number of leaves, I think 7 leaves, and heat it and apply it to the ankle. And the pain, like you have to do it over a period of time, maybe a few more days, and the pain reduces. And I've seen my mom do it quite a few times, and she does it periodically to make sure that the pain doesn't come back, and it's really effective. So I shared a few plants because maybe you may have seen these, may not have seen these, but this is just a small glimpse of the wide variety of plants that grow wild in our spaces. Some of these might be growing if you have a terrace garden, if you have a garden space, a yard, these might be growing. Or if you walk out tomorrow, I'm sure you might spot at least one of these outside. So this is all I'll be sharing today about the plants, because if I share, we'll be spending like the next 2 days just looking at different plants. And I can keep talking about plants, but I will move to the next point. Yes. I'm just checking one. Okay. So a few reminders before we like delve deeper into this topic. So understand, like we need to have a very important perspective shift that has to happen, and that is that every plant has a use. I grew up learning that some plants are useful and some plants are not, and that really like disconnected me from nature. That really disconnected, like there was a separation from nature that happened, because I thought this is what is useful, like a brinjal plant, or I don't know, a tomato plant or a curry leaf plant is more useful, or tulsi plant is more useful than the others that are just growing wild. But that perspective shift needs to happen, where we realize that every plant has a use, and it is our limited knowledge that we don't know their uses and their properties in its entirety. It's our limited knowledge, and not the plants. And also this is something like, it's like I often tell people, if your child or if any child is curious and asks you, do you know what plant that is? Do you know what tree that is? Not to tell them that it's useless. Not to tell them that, but tell them that I don't know. I'm sure it has a use, but I am not sure. Let's find out, or let's ask somebody, or whatever works for you. So it's a really important perspective shift that I think needs to happen. The next one is, not all plants are edible. Not all edible plants are palatable. Not all medicinal plants are edible. And I think this is self-explanatory. I don't need to go into this. And it's very important to remember these, because there are some plants that are edible, but they're not palatable. They might, you might be able to eat a little bit of it, but not the whole of it. And they are edible because you can add it to your a lot of medicine making and stuff. So there's like this, you can use these in combinations and stuff. The next one is plants growing wild are the best source of nutrition and mostly organic in nature, except for plants growing near sewage areas or canals and gutters. Other than that, plants usually are really like the best source of nutrition. And why I say this is because when I look at plants growing in wilderness, these plants are basically fighting for soil. They're fighting with the other plants for nutrition. They're fighting for sunlight. And the plants that you see have come after a lot of fighting with each other. And they're very resilient and they're very strong. And that's what we are, if you do forage and consume it, that's what we are consuming. And that's why it's really like we are eating the best. Like, they're so resilient and so strong. The next one is, and I'll keep reiterating it throughout the talk today, do your research before you consume a newly learned plant. If you don't know about a plant and you've done a little bit of research, you're still doubtful, do not consume it. Do your research, enough research, make sure that you have, at least one person who has consumed it, or make sure about that and then only consume it. Do not just randomly pick something and eat. The next one is weeds versus uncultivated plants or wild edible plants. A lot of times plants that are not cultivated are called weeds, and this came from a very mainstream agricultural practice, where the plants that are being cultivated are of some value, and the plants that are not being cultivated are considered as unwanted and weeds. This is not the same if we look at other traditional farming systems, for example, the natural farming or mixed crop farming system. The uncultivated plants are not considered as weeds because they add to the soil nutrition. They add a lot of richness to the soil. They break down, the pebbles and the big rocks in the soil. They help in creating soil. They help in regenerating the soil. So that shift also of perspective again is very important to, if you really want to understand the wild plants and uncultivated plants, to not call these plants as weeds or useless plants, but to really call these plants as uncultivated wild edible plants. I'll just pause and I'll see if there are any questions or anything that has come, and then we will resume. Okay.
What is uncultivated plants?
I don't know who's asking this question.
Sai Advaita.
Hi, Sayadwaita. I will come back to these questions. So uncultivated plants are just basically plants that just grow wild. We're not paying any attention to them. We are not pouring water to them every day. We are not giving them fertilizers or manure or anything. They just grow on their own. They are very free, independent. They have a mind of their own, kind of very individualistic plants, also very community based plants. So that's what uncultivated plants are. Okay, so I will I just saw. So we'll resume. So today's, for me, why I talked about like the theme of the session workshop talk is uh, decolonizing food system and reclaiming wild plants, is because I feel, just the act of foraging has a lot of layers to it. It's not just going out and picking a few leaves and coming back and cooking, but it's a lot. There's a lot of layers to it, and and what we are looking at, like this chart, is all the interconnected layers. And this is my limited knowledge or my limited understanding of this topic, and I'm sure there's much more to it than what I can comprehend and put here. So one of the most important thing, why we should reclaim, or why we should start foraging, or why we should start reclaiming wild plants, is first, it helps in it it somewhere works around decolonizing. Like I said, it's and this goes to the topic, to the theme of reclaiming traditional knowledge systems, to really understand what is it that my grandmom or my great grandmother or great grandparents ate, and how did they cook it, and what does that even mean, and how did that change happen? Why is a spinach or a kale more common than I don't know, than spiny amaranthus that grows in my yard, or a peperomia pellucida that grows in my yard? Why has that shift happened? And how can, and that connects to localizing food systems, the like kale, and now it is being grown in India, but it is also replacing a lot of local food crops. So how do, like that connection is very important. How do I not eat these exotic, um, exotic non-local food, which 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 pays a lot of, which puts a lot of burden on the planet, which puts a lot of burden on the planet, and which has a lot of carbon footprint. But how can I, like, not spend, like, reduce my carbon footprint? Basically, how can I not burden planet earth anymore? And and, and that doesn't mean that eating foraging and eating wild plants on a daily basis. That means just like weekly once, if you do it, that's a big dent in the, in the larger scheme of things. That one day foraging, or once in 10 days foraging, makes a huge difference. For example, as I started foraging, I also started exploring a lot of different teas that I can make. So I make something called a blue tea, which is a wildflower called butterfly pea, which it's called Shangapushpi, Aparajita in Sanskrit, and Shangapushpam in Malayalam. And we brew that. That grows now wild in our yard, and I brew that as it has become an alternative to the usual chai that we have on a daily basis. And the dependency on tea has shifted to something that is local, and something that's delicious and exciting. Having, like, every day seeing that blue colored brewed tea is just, and trying like different flavors with it. For example, ginger or fennel seeds. It's, the creativity is always on. At the same time, I am, cutting down on my, the excessive demand for tea, and the tea plantations that have, that is taking away land in a lot of these hill stations, and the entire site. So even that small step puts a dent, and I think that, personally, I feel that's a big, huge contribution, and that's my personal view. um, Another important aspect of why reclaiming wild plants is important is because uh, it is it helps in keeping the immediate ecosystem regenerative. So what happens is, when you stop accessing a plant, and this is my experience of it, and I'm sure you may have also come across this, when we stop accessing a particular plant or plants, the plant grows for some time, but the density of the flora reduces over a period of time. So if we have like a patch of, say, I don't know, a patch of common lucas growing, and if I stop accessing it, after a few years, it reduces to maybe one or two plants. And this is something that I have experienced. My partner's parents in Chennai, they find it really difficult to find these wild plants. And now what they do is they've been buying these wild plants from nurseries and planting them, because they've been wanting to add these plants to their diet, but they're just unable to find them growing, like because the diversity has come down. And even if they are growing, they might not be a lot. There might be enough for maybe one person or two people. They might not be enough to take care of an entire family. So when we start accessing the wild edible plants, we are creating a regenerative system, and which is very important. The next one, I think very important is we need to rewild our concrete and urban spaces. The more concretization of our spaces is happening, the more earth is not breathing. We are really like putting like concrete. We are taking away the ability for earth to breathe. And by rewilding, by making sure that wilderness grows in small patches, there we are creating a space for earth to just breathe. Um, and Yes, and the last one, very important one for me, is reclaiming autonomy over health. And I talked about this in the first slide also. Somebody in one of the talks I gave previously talked about the footpath pharmacy. It was very interesting to think about a footpath pharmacy, because it really makes sense. If I step out and if there's a patch of land, there will be all the plants there will have a medicinal property, and they will, I'm sure I can use it to maybe take care of my kidney, or take care of my liver, or take care of my skin, take care of my hair. And so, the patch of land is enough. But what has happened over the years, for me at least, I've seen that the control of my health, I have given it over to, um, modern medicine, and have completely given it over. I'm not saying modern medicine is wrong, but what I'm saying is maybe if we start adding these plants to our diet on a very minimal basis, and on a daily or once a week basis, the kidney stones that is supposed to happen next month might happen after a year. So basically, you're taking care of your system. You're taking care of your system by incorporating this in your diet. Yes. I'm just checking the time. Yes. So for why is there a need to forage in urban spaces? And it's really important, because again, I said, people talk about, there's this myth that foraging can happen only in rural places, but that's not true. Foraging can easily happen in urban spaces. And why it's really important to do that today is because this is already happening in rural spaces. A lot of communities are, a lot of their food comes from foraged, from the foraging that they do. My parents live in a very semi-urban place in Kerala, and they still access a lot of greens from their own garden. So why foraging is important in urban spaces? First, it helps in reclaiming commons. And when I say commons, the ponds that are just being polluted there, and the pieces of land that are just left barren, these are places where these plants grow. A lot of wild edible plants grow in on ponds, banks of different ponds or water bodies. So if we start clearing these spaces, keeping them clean, keeping them accessible, and maybe I dream of this, that a community, the community comes together and takes care of it, and whatever grows there is shared by the community, co-owned by the community. That in a way we are reclaiming the commons, because today there's a complete privatization of commons that is happening. The next one is utilizing unused private land for foraging. A lot of plots, unused private plots, which are not even fenced, are just lying there barren. And I've not seen, like, I have gone and foraged myself in unused plots, and I've not seen anybody coming and saying, "Why are you doing this here?" And these can be used. We can access so many plants here. Creating new community commons. Maybe you can have 2 or 3 pots in your terrace garden or in your garden space, and keep it just for the wild plants to grow. And maybe that can be your community garden. Your neighbor might have a few pots, and that can be the community garden. And whatever plants grow there, you can share it together, and this can be a system that you can create. I know there's a lot of community kitchen gardens that have been forming in urban spaces in India, but maybe we need more community, wild community commons where wild plants are also being grown. This recognizing that we are not the only beings, this has been one of my biggest learnings in this work of foraging, to really learn that I'm not the only one who accesses these plants. Like, there are a lot of other beings that are dependent on these plants, that access these plants, and to really like leave enough, like I can take for myself and also leave for them too. And that's really important. So whenever I forage fruits, like wild fruits or wild flowers, I make sure that I leave enough for the bees or the butterflies, the birds. It's really important, and that has happened over a period of time. Initially, I remember when I used to forage, there's so much abundance. I would just go and pick all of it up and waste so much of it, because I don't need like a kg of greens to cook. I don't, because I won't be eating so much. So yes. And the next one is sustainable and conscious way of life. This is something I have personally seen, and I've also seen other people who have shared their journey of foraging with me, that as you start consciously foraging, you slowly start slowing down. You slowly connect. You start taking more conscious. You start becoming more conscious about your life choices. You start becoming more conscious. You start becoming more sustainable. Because if I'm stepping out, going to forage, and if I see a pile of plastic lying, then I won't feel like eating those greens, because it's dirty. And I will make sure next time to not dirty that place, because somebody like me might be foraging. So these small steps really plays a very important role. This is something my friend shared with me when I was talking about foraging. Foraging is a political act, a natural act, because as in our time frame of in our evolution, we were foragers. Agriculture came later. We were basically foragers, and this is something that communities still practice. There are communities that are closer to nature, communities that are still in connection with their ecosystem still practice. So it is a political act. It's also a natural act. So invitation, the invitation is to like really reconnect, reclaim, and to experiment. And this is something that I've really enjoyed in this entire journey uh, of wild edible plants, of forgotten greens, is to really experiment, to keep the essence of the traditional system, the traditional knowledge that is there, but at the same time to understand that I don't want to drink the rasam every day. Maybe I want to try something different. Maybe I want to, how do I make it more interesting for myself? And that has been my journey. And I keep inviting. I host something called Rewild Your Life, and I often tell participants, keep experimenting. like really don't limit yourself when it comes to using the wild edible plants and cooking them. Really, like, try different things, and you never know what clicks. So these are some of the things that I have experimented with, that I took photos of. There are a lot more that I couldn't take photos of. And yeah, it's amazing. Some of them are traditional recipes, and some of them are not. Some of them are just completely new that I just tried on my own. And yeah, the results have always been interesting and delicious and colorful. Okay. So how do I start my journey of, if you, some of you, in the registration link, a lot of you had asked, how do I start foraging? I do want to know about wild plants. How do I start this? So I often tell people this, start noticing what grows around you. Really pay attention to the plants that grows, and not the cultivated ones, the ones that are uncultivated, that just pops up, the ones that pop up on their own and they're there. Maybe not, don't weed them immediately, let them grow, see what is growing, and then maybe later weed them. um, Ask your elders, neighbors, random strangers, even children. You can ask, if you learned about a new plant, take it and ask your elder. I've always done this. I've always asked somebody who's an elderly person, and I've like shown them a plant and said, do you know this? Or I take my phone and show a photo and I ask them, do you know this plant? And then they will just, if they know the plant, they will just give you like this entire story of how to cook them, maybe some random memory they have about their childhood. It's really interesting. It's fun, always fun, and it's really nice. I remember my grandmother in her last stages. Uh, Her memory was slowly fading, and one day me and my mom just went and asked her about stinging nettle, and in that fading memory, she remembered that, and she said, oh yes, we added to the rice porridge, and we do something with the rice porridge, and she remembered that. So ask, and that's like the best way, and that's how I learned. Somebody has asked my journey also. That's how I learned. I kept asking. Sometimes people laugh, but I just keep asking. You can ask your neighbors, random strangers. If I see somebody plucking a flower or a plant, and I'm interested to know about that plant, I will go and pester them. I will ask them, why do you use this? Why are you plucking it? Oh, is it this? Is it that? So ask random strangers. And children are somebody uh, we often underestimate. Children often have a lot of interesting games around these plants. Children have a lot of interesting stories around these plants. If you ask them, they might really tell you. Some of the wild fruits that I have tasted, wild edible fruits that I have tasted, has been introduced to me by children, and they'll have like interesting stories around it. You Google the local name. If you have a local name, Google it up. You might not find the same plant that you're looking for, but you might find something in the similar in the neighborhood. And then if you keep looking for it, you will for sure find it. And this is true in all other aspects also in life, but in this specifically, if your seeking is strong, you will find out about the plant. You will for sure find out. Also, conscious foraging. This is something I often tell people. Make sure that you are conscious when you're foraging, not to just uproot the plant because it's there, but just take the top stem or the leaves or whatever you require to make sure that the plant regenerates itself. Otherwise, if we uproot, it won't, and there won't be enough for the others to access. Take small steps. Consume a new plant in small quantities. If you're learning about a new plant, and just consume little bit, like 250 grams. Don't eat a lot in the very first go. I've done that. There's a plant called Bhui Amla, Philanthus neruri, and I have the first time I took a lot and I made I made I think a tea with it, and I couldn't drink it because it was so bitter. I didn't know it was bitter, and then later I slowly and that's my lesson. That's how I learned that add little. little quantities. And the most important thing, reconnect and rewild. Spend more time in nature and, you know, notice and pay attention, talk to the plants and have a conversation, have like plant parties if you want, spend time with the plant, and that's really important. And also add wild edibles, like if you are finding about a plant, learning about a plant, add it to your day-to-day diet. Something that I have personally experienced um, in my explorations around wild plants is that if I keep, so initially I made a herbarium about it. I would read up about plants, you know, I would read up from different books, and all that got stored in my head, but none of it was practical. I didn't know. I knew that you know, plant XYZ is used for cure. You know, used when I have a cold. But when I really had a cold, I didn't. I didn't know that I can really use it. So I would go and pop in a pill. So if you, when you start adding it to your day-to-day diet, it becomes part of your conscious memory. It becomes part of your conscious, like body memory. And then next time when you have a cold or if you have a headache, you know what to access. Yes, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. I'm inviting questions. If anybody has any questions, you can either put it um, in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and share. Okay, I will just go through the questions that. So I did share how to begin research identification of plants you encounter. Something very basic is Google Lens that I use, but it is not accurate at all. But like I said, Google it up and you might find something similar in the neighborhood, and you will find it. You keep looking for it. The most important aspect of it is to keep looking for it. Yeah, even I would have loved to see more slides on the edible wild plants, but we just have this much time. Maybe I can host another one just talking about the wild plants. I can talk about it the whole day and the whole night. It doesn't tire me at all. So I, there are different initiatives. For example, in Bangalore, there's an initiative called Sarjapur Curries. I can Sarjapur Curries. Somebody called Somesh who runs that, who basically has been working on rewilding, and he runs a market of wild plants and also how to revive the forgotten recipes. There's a wild plant market in Coimbatore, if I'm not wrong. I think it's called the Kire Kadai. I'm not sure. I've never personally visited them, but I know about of Sarjapur curries because I've been in touch with them. There are market like all. I'm sure like farmers markets and different organic shops host these wild plants. There's a organic shop right here in Kozhikode called Elements Cafe, which sells wild plants. So there are, just check these organic shops and you might find it. I know Organic Farmers Market in Chennai does during the day of their sale, they sell wild plants too. So I am not a very big fan of apps that help identifying plants, because my journey has always been about how do I own up my learning, and when I do it with the help of an app, I am sort of outsourcing it, and that completely disconnects me from the people around me. You know, like the elders we can ask, or uh, like if you have somebody who's coming and helping you in your garden or your terrace garden, you can ask them. So that disconnection starts happening, and that's why, and not all Android apps that I have experienced personally are accurate. So I am very skeptical about apps. One, because I feel that it is one of the ways to outsource learning and outsource knowledge system, and also because the whole work around that we're talking about is that I am talking about is through Forgotten Greens is to reclaim knowledge systems. And the second reason why I'm not very uh, for apps is because they're not always accurate. And if they do give you the wrong information, and if you do end up eating it, it might have a side effect, or it might not be fully edible. And so I personally don't recommend apps except for Google Lens. And even if I'm saying Google Lens, I say that Google Lens is like just the first small step. After that, you have like 50 more steps to take to make sure that you identify and then only consume. So there are different books. So the plants that I have shared are mostly plants that grow commonly in urban India, except for, like I said, northeastern part of India. That's the flora I have not explored at all. And whatever books that you find around India would uh, be focusing on, would like these plants would be growing in your city too. So there are books. I don't have. There are a lot of local publication books that are more reliable than like big publication books that I have found. At least I have found a lot of local publication books that are reliable. Lot of Instagram posts, Instagram handles talk about wild edible plants. Forgotten Greens is one of those. Lots, Sarjapur curries that I talked about. There's something called, a lot of people who are into permaculture talk a lot about wild plants. So you can keep looking at it. There are a lot of there are a lot of Facebook posts, Facebook groups that around identifying plants and stuff. Yes, so that's that. A crowdsourced document specific to different parts of India would be amazing. Yes, that would be amazing. Would love to. I have been dreaming of working on a book to make it more user friendly, a bit more interactive. It's a lot of work, so yeah, it's a dream. So there's no way you can identify if a plant is toxic, even if a plant. So they're very interesting. Plants are very interesting beings, just like how human beings are. We are so complicated in our own ways. There are plants where the leaf might be edible, but the seed would be toxic. The root might be toxic, but the flower might be edible. So there are plants like that too. Like the pollen might be toxic, but the flower is edible. So just make, yeah. So I the tips, one of, I don't know, because plants have these very confusing. If I say don't go for something that is bright and shiny, but there are plants and flowers that are bright and shiny and are edible. So yeah, my only tip is ask ask around, ask your elders, um, ask children who play in the wilderness. Ask, they will know. For example, lantana is these multicolored flower that grows very very wild. It's an invasive plant that was introduced in India by the British. And lantana, the plant as such is not edible. However, the fruits are edible, and fruits are, I remember as a child I used to enjoy eating the lantana fruits. So yeah, so there are just these complicated layers. I can't give one tip to identify if a plant is edible or this. I'm just reading through the chats. Do you recommend some? If you are following me on Instagram, I do share a lot about people who are. Instagram has a lot of people talking about wild plants, forgotten food. So if you do follow my Instagram handle, you will be. I do share quite often. Um, I can't remember it right now because there's so many there. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just reading a lot of. I'm just coming to if there are any questions. So, so the connection between Forgotten Greens and Slow Food, if you did get a chance to go through Slow Food International's website or the Slow Food movement, and what is Slow Food really talking about? Slow Food talks about connecting to the land and not destroying the biodiversity, and really talking about regenerative biodiversity and really and decolonizing the food system and really bringing the control back into the the control of food to the consumers and to the ones who grow, to the producers, and taking away this control that the corporations or the big companies or the big players in the food system, taking that control away from them and giving this control back to these small, to the ones who really eat and to the ones who really grow. That is the people, and that's important. and and that's what slow food talks about. And for me, forgotten greens, the work around wild plants is that, how do I know for a fact that just last week was Dasara, the festival, and we had to cook food and we did not have a lot of vegetables. And I just foraged greens from my garden space. And we don't have a huge garden space, we have a small garden space. So, and we could make a proper festive meal just from that. And so I didn't have to go to the market. And then I don't know if you were there as for the part where I talked about how it's connected to a lot of different layers around, mitigating climate change and a lot of other layers. So that's how I think it is connected to slow food. Yeah, I live in a rural, semi-urban space. So the nights in Kerala are has a lot of beautiful sound. It's a lot of music. I will just quickly close because I recognize it's 8:15. I'm not sure if you can, if I have answered your questions. However, here I'm sharing Forgotten Greens. I run the handle Instagram and Facebook. And what I also offer wild food walks, which couldn't happen this year due to COVID. I also do something called Rewild Your Life, where I invite, it's a 10 to 12-day program where I invite individuals to, it's an online program where I invite people to come and I share information about different plants. So I share, if it's a 10-day program, I share information about 10 different wild edibles that grows in in all our ecosystems, and how to identify them, how to add that to the diet, how to make that part of the diet, and the different lores around it, if at all there are. So yeah, so that's something that I offer, that I'm planning to also offer this month. So if you are interested, you can follow me either on Facebook or on Instagram. And those who those who are not part of social media can follow me. Like you can connect to me via email or both also. I also want it would be great if you can fill out this form that I, I would really like to know how the session was for you. I would be sharing this with the Terra Madre group too. So it would be great if you can fill out. It's not a long form, it's a quick form to also know how many people turned up today. It really helps. And as part of the form, you can, if you want me to keep you informed of similar such programs or talks that I or somebody else is hosting, do let me know and I can put you in loop. I've been talking a lot and I'm really happy that this happened and really happy that whoever came today, thank you for making it and thank you for coming. And I will send out a mail with the form link. It would really be helpful if you can fill out the form. I'll send out a mail. I'll also share some of the resources that I mentioned during the talk. So yes, until next time, whenever the next time is, thank you very much for joining.